President Putin is expected to win the presidential elections with a huge margin. Putin and only 3 other candidates are vying for the high office in Moscow. To get more on what we can expect after elections, we're going to be joined by Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at this hour. Backtracking a little bit, yesterday there were reports of attempts to disrupt elections on the outskirts of Russia. How rife were these incidents?
Well, we keep hearing about 2 types of incidents that are taking place as Russians go to the polls. The first one is when there are cases of vandalism, when dye is being poured into the ballot boxes. We have seen several cases in Russia's regions. On the second day of the voting, it has been recorded in Yekaterinburg as well as in Altai Krai. But the authorities, the election authorities, are already familiar with these type of techniques, so they were very quick to prevent that from happening. Now we understand that the people who have already done so on the first day, they have been getting their sentences by the Russian courts. Some of them have been forced to sign the letters saying that they will not be leaving the country. Others got several days of arrest, and the lady who threw a Molotov cocktail was sentenced to the arrest until the 14th of May. Another type of the irregularities is obviously the attempts by the Ukrainian side to disrupt the election. The Russian president said Ukraine does want to prevent Russians from exercising their civic duty by intensifying and stepping up the attacks against the Belgorod region, for instance, which is close to the border with Ukraine, as well as other territories inside Russia and even deep within the Russian territory. This morning we've heard about 2 people being killed in Belgorod region as a result of the Ukrainian attack. Several more have been wounded. We also have seen attacks against the oil refineries across the territory of Russia, including 2 in the Samara region. Now, this is also becoming the new reality. We have, over the course of the past few days, seen several cases of oil refineries being targeted by the Ukrainian side. Now, according to some analysts, that could lead to the disruption of supply of oil domestically, and then obviously that could affect the lives of Russians.
Dasha, on the back of that, and thank you for that context, because President Putin is expected to win these elections, are we likely to see him affecting any changes in the country, particularly the posture in relations to the war in the Ukraine?
Well, certainly the understanding here in Russia is that the incumbent president will be securing the 5th term as president of Russia, and he will remain in power until 2030. That has become possible after the constitutional amendments made in 2020, which nullified the previous 2 terms that President Putin served. As for the perception here in Russia, you can certainly see that people come to the polling stations saying that they have to exercise this civic duty. The authorities is doing their utmost to increase the turnout, but obviously people do say that there is no viable alternative at the moment to incumbent Vladimir Putin. As for the changes, there is the sentiment among several Russians that something major could happen, some major announcements could be made following the re-election of President Vladimir Putin. At the same time, what we hear from the authorities is that Russians have to come to the polling stations to vote for the strong, independent and sovereign Russia, as for instance Ella Pamfilova, the head of the Central Election Commission, said earlier this morning, saying that Russians do have a choice and they have to choose for the strong Russia. That's why they have to come to the polling stations. Obviously the Ukrainian context is very important, but as the operation is ongoing, it is largely isolated. Many of the Russian society have chosen to stay away from thinking about it, and many of those who come to the polling stations, they say that they have to vote for Vladimir Putin to make sure that this operation ends in a favorable for Russia way.
Dasha, just as we wrap up, the war is intensified and there are more casualties. Has there been any reaction from the Ukraine in relation to the elections in Russia?
Well, we understand from what Russian officials are saying is that Ukraine is trying to interfere with the Russian elections by stepping up those attacks, and the Russian officials insist that Ukraine will not succeed. Most recently, we have seen not only drones, not only missiles being fired against the Russian Federation, but also attempts to infiltrate the Russian border. Cross-border attacks took place in the border regions of Belgrade and Kursk, and the Russian Ministry of Defense says they have managed to prevent all of those. Now, again, Moscow is accusing Ukraine of trying to deliberately target the civilian targets inside Russia and disrupt the election. But also keep in mind that the election for the Russian president is for the first time being held in Russia's so-called new territories that used to be under the Ukrainian control. This is the region of Kherson, Zaporizhia region, some territories of the Kharkiv region as well. We also understand that the voting is taking place in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic, and the turnout is high there as well. For the Russian authorities, it will be very important to show these high numbers of turnout in order to legitimize this voting and say that these are the people who support incumbent President Vladimir Putin.